This episode is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com, the #1 seller of games and gaming accessories. And GatheringMagic.com, the #1 resource for Magic the Gathering news and articles.
Hi, my name is John Knost, and this is my Vorel of the whole Clade deck. So I'll start by talking a little bit about the commander of my deck, Vorel of the whole Clade. He costs 1 a green and a blue to cast, and he has an ability for a green and a blue. Tap for each counter on target artifact, creature, or land. Put another one of those counters on that permanent. He's a 1/4 human merfolk legendary creature. I'm running 12 forests in the deck with art from various sets. I'm not very particular about the lands I put in my decks. Pretty much when I'm building one, I'll use whatever I have on hand from whatever sets I happen to have lands from. Then there are 13 islands. And then we get into the non-basic lands. First up is Alchemist's Refuge. This is a great utility land that every Simic deck should probably run. Breeding Pool. While I'd love to run the alpha dual lands in my commander decks, I've only been playing since about 2008 and have never had the extra cash lying around to invest in them. But the Ravnica Shock lands serve nicely enough, thanks to how attainable they've become since Return to Ravnica Block reprinted them. Next up, Cavern of Souls. One thing to say about this card, if your deck is at all dependent upon its general, run this card. It's great being able to cast a general without worrying about him being countered. Hinterland Harbor. The Innistrad enemy check lands are great. I made a point of acquiring a playset of each one during that block. Hollow Trees. I'll soon be adding to the deck the blue version of this Fallen Empires type of storage land. The blue version is called Sand Silos. It pretty much works the same way. It comes into play tapped, and then you can choose not to untap it during your untap step, and instead put a storage counter on it. And then when you do choose to untap it, you can tap it and remove any number of storage counters and add that much mana of whatever color the land makes to your pool. These storage lands can be ridiculously good with Vorel. During my last game, Hollow Trees had over 200 counters on it at one point. Llanowar Reborn. While many of the creatures in my deck come with or make their own +1/+1 counters, the few that don't only need 1 for Vorel to work his magic on them, and Llanowar Reborn provides. Minamo, School at Water's Edge. I do look to maximize Vorel's counter shenanigans as much as possible, and this land is just one more way to get an extra activation out of my general, as well as a few other legendary permanents that you'll see later in the deck list. Opal Palace, because in a pinch, Vorel can target himself. Oran Reef, the Vastwood. This is in for similar reasons as Llanowar Reborn. While there are a few mono blue and colorless creatures in the deck that this misses, the majority have green in their makeup. Next up, Rushwood Grove. And at the same time, we'll look at Saprazan Cove. This flavor of storage land from Mercadian Masks are a little bit better than their Fallen Empires counterparts, thanks to some untapped shenanigans that this deck can pull off. Simic Guildgate, and Yavimaya Coast are just a couple more ways to make blue or green mana. Now we'll start looking at the creatures. First up is Experiment 1. This is the only 1-drop in the deck. It is a good utility creature, and of course when it gets counters on it, Vorel can go to town on it and make it into a pretty nice attacker as well as a blocker. Blighted Agent. I include a few alternate win conditions in the deck, poison being one of them. This is my sole source of poison, however. He can be a one-hit kill when he's loaded up with +1/+1 counters, or alternatively I can ping all my opponents with him once or twice and then go wide with Proliferate. Kiora's Follower, another way to get extra activations out of Vorel and other permanents. Sage of Hours. Anyone who's played against my deck at some point since Journey into Nyx was released knows to kill Sage of Hours on sight. I usually won't cast him unless I know I have the means to break him immediately. The last time I successfully cast the Sage, I ended up taking an extra 129 turns. If the table doesn't scoop, I can usually close out the game by the 3rd or 4th of my extra turns. Thrumming Bird, a good early source of Proliferate if there's at least one opponent who has no way to block it. Zamek Guild Mage. I love this little guy. He puts counters on my guys, and he reloads my hand when I'm running out of gas. I never understand why people want him dead. Well, this might be one reason why my Zamek Guild Mage gets killed so often. Chasm Skulker. With him out, along with the Guild Mage, I can draw card after card after card until I run out of mana to pay for activations. While I'm on this card, I would like to give a shout out to its designer, Mikey Newman, creative director on the Borderlands series. If you've never listened to the Chainsaw Suit podcast that he does with Chris Straub, or watched Movies with Mikey on the Chainsaw Suit Originals YouTube channel, you should. Eternal Witness. One theme of my deck seems to be that my opponents often blow up my stuff. What's not to like about bringing back that critical combo piece? Fertilid. I wasn't running this card until a recent Command Tower article talked about how good it is. I do love the versatility of this card and the fact that I can use it as a political tool, offering rampant growths to my opponents in exchange for favors. Gilder Baron. There is no creature in the deck I'm happier to see in my opening hand or top deck. Why? Notice that unlike Vorel, he can double the counters on any permanent, including Planeswalkers. He's also one piece of a very sweet 3-card engine that I'll talk about when I get to a later card in the deck. Simic Manipulator, another dude that frequent opponents have learned to murder on sight, even though I think I'm pretty fair with him. I usually won't take your guys as long as you're attacking each other with them and not me. Okay, that's not always true. Next up, Treasure Mage and his little brother, Trinket Mage. Treasure Mage and Trinket Mage are included for their obvious artifact tutoring abilities. When we get to the non-creature spells, my passion for artifacts will be apparent, and I'll talk about some of the artifacts that I fetch with these guys. Next, Yisan the Wanderer Bard. Yisan is the most recent addition to Vorel's army. It can be tricky to determine when to give the Bard a boost with Vorel, but it's usually a rewarding experience. Arcbound Reclaimer. This dude is here for one reason, and you've heard it before. People keep hating on my stuff. I need ways to bring it back sometimes, and Arcbound Reclaimer does a pretty good job, and does it over and over again thanks to Vorel's encouragement. Fathom Mage. Now, pay no attention to the rules text on this card. Instead, pretend it says green, blue, tap, draw 2, or 4, or maybe 8, or maybe all my cards. Forgotten Ancient. Remember the time I took 129 extra turns with Sage of Hours? Or the time I one-shotted you with the Blighted Agent? Or the time you couldn't kill my Throwing Bird because it was a 30-30? That was Forgotten Ancient's fault. Master Biomancer. Master Biomancer also combos incredibly well with Vorel and all his friends. And all that stuff I said about Forgotten Ancient, well, it might have been Master Biomancer's fault too. Spikeweaver. Spikeweaver is probably the card I've prayed to top deck the most often. Vorel often just needs time to set up and do ridiculous things, and aggressive beatdown decks are the bane of his existence. Spikeweaver says no to those decks. He's also another useful political tool along the same lines as Fertilid. Crufix, God of Horizons. A trademark of my deck is its ability to frequently generate far more mana than it needs. Crufix is mostly in the deck to stockpile that mana for future use, and also the no maximum hand size can occasionally come in handy when I'm drawing a lot of extra cards. Mercfiend Liege. The Liege's +1/+1 granting abilities are nice, but really they're just gravy. He's here because of his third line of rules text. Untap all green and or blue creatures you control during each other player's untap step. Untapping all my guys every turn usually means extra activations for Vorel and all his friends. A few turns of that and I've probably got the game in the bag. Prophet of Crufix. The day that Theros hit shelves, I went out and bought a copy of this for every single commander deck I own that includes blue and green. She does everything that Mercfiend Liege does, only better. Lands 2. And Seedborn Muse. Between the Liege, the Prophet, and Seedborn Muse, I think I'd first pick the Muse most of the time because she untaps all my artifacts too. Experiment Crash. The Crash is the third piece of the engine that I mentioned earlier with Gilderbairn and Vorel. With a +1/+1 counter on Vorel and on the Bairn, the Crash can just keep tapping and untapping and doubling over and over until I run out of mana. Tap to activate Vorel's ability, untap to activate the Gilderbairn. Ad infinitum until I run out of mana. And remember, this deck can make a lot of mana. Progenitor Mimic. I had to wait over a year before the price of this card dropped low enough that I was comfortable picking a few up for my Simic decks. It's an all-around good card to have, though. I often cast it when somebody's targeting my Prophet of Crufix for destruction. Platinum Angel. I put Platinum Angel in the same category as Spikeweaver. It often keeps me in the game until I can go bonkers with counters. It has been a frequent target of Treasure Mage. And the last creature in the deck, Myojin of Seeing Winds. Casting Myojin is usually pretty easy with the large amounts of mana Vorel can generate, and I never run out of divinity counters. And if I can cast it, I'm usually pretty confident that I'll have enough mana to cast all the cards I'll draw with it. On to the non-creature spells. First up, Astral Cornucopia and Everflowing Chalice. One of these is almost always my Trinket Mage fetch target. A few Vorel activations on one of these and I'm set on mana. Chimeric Mass, an occasional backup Trinket Mage target, sometimes useful as a massive attacker to close out games, as typically it survives a board wipe. Often I'll just use this as a source of counters to move around. Surge Node, another occasional Trinket Mage target. People have often looked at me strange when I cast Astral Cornucopia for 0 or Everflowing Chalice with no kicker, until I play this handy little tool and start loading them up. Voltaic Key, a final Trinket Mage target, mainly in the deck for its synergy with the Astral Cornucopia or Everflowing Chalice. Cyclonic Rift. I never don't overload this. It has saved my bacon many a time. If you're playing blue, you should probably have Cyclonic Rift in your deck. Grind Clock. An alternate win condition. Not one that I turn to very often, but it's fun to watch the horror growing on my opponent's faces as the counters on the clock jump up and up and up. Illusionist Bracers. These are for Vorel to wear, and Gilder Baron, and Experiment Crash, and Simic Manipulator. I could go on. Liquimetal Coating. Might seem like an odd choice at first, but remember, Vorel can't target planeswalkers, but he can target artifacts. Power Conduit. I love this card. It's so versatile, and it does a lot of work in this deck. Like I mentioned earlier that I often use Chimeric Mass as a source of counters to move around. This is what I'm moving them around with. Ring of Evos Isle and Ring of Colonia. These are quite useful utility equipments that put +1/+1 counters on the equipped creatures for Vorel to work with. The hexproof is occasionally useful, but the trampling can almost always be put to good use. Blue Sun Zenith is pretty much here to help reload my hand. Rings of Brighthearth. Believe it or not, I only picked up this card for the deck a few weeks ago. I don't know what I was thinking. This card is bonkers, and I've already got another on order for another deck. Dark Steel Reactor, another alt-win condition, and probably the one I've used the most to win games I otherwise had no business winning. One of Power Conduit's best friends. Jace, Architect of Thought. Vorel is living the dream when he can double the starting loyalty of his planeswalkers and ultimate them the turn they are played. I've pulled that off a couple times with Jace's ultimate. It is so much fun. Jace's -2 ability is also quite useful for digging for those answers when you're in trouble. Kiora, the Crashing Wave. I've managed to pull off Kiora's ultimate the same turn I cast her once as well. Her +1 ability is also a great way to stay alive. Lux Cannon, counter-based removal, a perfect fit for Vorel. Plasm Capture. And when it comes to counterspells, I'm typically either all in or all out. It's a testament to how good this counterspell is that I'm running it as the only one in the deck. The Chain Veil. When I saw this card during the spoilers for M15, I knew I'd be buying one for inclusion in Vorel. Unwinding Clock. In the same category with the Murkfiend Liege, Prophet of Krufix, and Seedborn Muse. The more I can untap and reuse my stuff, the faster Vorel can take control of the game. Vidalcan Orrery. Another awesome card that I just never felt was worth spending the money to buy, and then discovered how good it was after opening one in a conspiracy draft. Doubling Season. Sort of an odd fit because I'm not really making that many tokens, but it's worth it for the counter doubling. Garruk, Primal Hunter. I think some of the other Garruks might be a better fit for this deck, but this is the one I own, so it's in. Ring of Three Wishes. In this deck, it's more like Ring of All the Wishes. Too bad these are wish counters and not charge counters. Tamiyo the Moonsage. Tamiyo is one of my favorite planeswalkers in recent years. I love to activate her ultimate the turn she enters the battlefield. Tezzeret the Seeker. I'll usually activate Tezzeret's second ability from -2 the turn I cast him and get Liquimetal Coating, but his +1 comes in handy also. Contagion Engine. Proliferate was my favorite mechanic when I first started collecting Magic, and it's still great for scratching my Johnny itch. I used to run the Contagion clasp in the deck as well, but it eventually got cut for something better. I don't recall what. Mycosynth Lattice, another somewhat odd inclusion, but it's mainly here because it makes anything in my deck targetable for Vorel's ability, and it has some nice synergy with the Unwinding Clock, untapping all my permanents each turn instead of just my artifacts when this is out. Karn Liberated. The first booster box of Magic I ever bought was New Phyrexia, and I pulled 2 Karns from it. I still remember that feeling every time I cast him. Finally, Darksteel Forge. The Forge is nice because it helps all my artifacts stick around, and because it is a little bit dangerous to play Mycosynth Lattice without it. Thanks for watching Commander Decks. Please subscribe and favorite.